And that's where we're starting out, transparency in fiscal governance. Begin with a look at the need for transparency, accountability in the management of public funds, particularly at the state level. This is coming particularly after, on the back of a sub-national audit efficacy report by the Paradigm Leadership Support Initiative that showed that 5 out of 36 state governments have effective public accounts committees in their state houses of assembly, and indeed they are managing their funds transparently. But we'll be looking into details of all of that in a moment. We're being joined by a lawyer and lead director, Center for Social Justice, here in our Abuja studio, Mr. Eze Onyekwe. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
And my colleagues in Lagos have somebody else there.
Well, yes, thank you, Nyata. We have with us here Olusegun Elemo, who is the executive director of PLSI that drew that report that you just mentioned. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, this is like the third in the series.
Absolutely.
And perhaps a little background might be okay for some people, because there are those who are hearing about this subnational audit efficacy index for the first time.
Well, let me say thank you for spotlighting the report. In 2020, we started to look at what's happening at subnational level, and you know, the federal government also, you know, with the support from the World Bank, had started the SIFTAS initiative, that's states transparency, fiscal transparency, accountability and sustainability program for results. And state had started implementing some reform initiatives. But you and I know that a lot of attention is on the center, and you know, many people look up to the center for what development they're expecting at even community level. And for us is that we needed to focus on how states are managing public resources, and that's why we started the subnational audit efficacy index in 2021. We launched the medium report in 2021. It was something a little bit sketchy. We just wanted to encourage states to begin to manage their resources more effectively and efficiently.
Is that to say that the instruments of states were not enough to ensure that?
No, absolutely. I mean, there were a lot of gaps as to whether procurement reforms, budget reforms, audit reforms, and all of this, you know, fuse into how, you know, efficiently public funds or public resources are utilized and managed. And at the time, we wanted to ensure that we support actors at subnational level. And a lot of things, you know, were lacking at the time. We recall that even recently, the president, you know, assented to the constitutional amendment that granted financial autonomy to state legislature and judiciary, which meant that at the time, you know, those things were lacking, and that's the whole essence. So we did the first, you know, subnational audit efficacy index 2020. We did that of 2021, which we then presented last year, March 31st precisely, and then we took it, you know, a step further to expand the methodology with which we're assessing all of the 36 states. But this time around, we went beyond, you know, public funds management to even begin to look at implementation of public policies, because that's even more critical to the lives of the people at subnational level. So that's the whole essence of subnational audit efficacy index.
There is a place of government officials. There are two categories, I dare say. There are the politicians, yeah, who are employed by the states, the people, for one role or the other. And then there are employees of government who are civil servants. Yeah. Which of these two classes of employees of the people do you think we have the most significant gaps that has made these gaps obvious that you see?
No, you see, everyone has their place in governance. I mean, you need the civil servants, you need the public servants. Indeed, civil servants are public servants, but not all public servants are civil servants. So, and there are public servants who are politicians. And that's why we're also looking at what's happening in parliament, state parliament.
My apologies. I hope you understand why that question is essential, because the drafts don't perform themselves.
Yeah.
The laws don't activate themselves.
Yeah.
The policies don't, particularly execute themselves. The budget doesn't execute itself. Yeah. It's people. Yeah. And one of these classes depends on the other candidate. On the other candidate. That's why I'm asking that question. Yeah. In which of these areas have you found these gaps? Because, as I said, there are instruments of state to ensure compliance with some of these things that PLSI is looking at. Yeah. So where do we have the most gaps?
Okay, so let's go straight into the methodology that we used. So we looked at implementation of the audit laws. That's the legal framework and operationalization. That's one of the methodology. Then we also looked, at submission of annual activity reports. We looked at, the type of audit document published online. We looked at, availability of citizens' accountability report. We looked at, citizens' participation in the audit process. We looked at effectiveness of public account committees. Those are the 5 I could count off my fingers, but there were 8. In the legal framework, for instance, there is the part that depended on civil servants. There is the part that depended on public servants. I'll give you an example. So the laws at subnational level provided for financial autonomy and administrative independence for audit offices. But that you need the will of the chief executive of the state to kickstart that, to set that in motion. That doesn't really holistically depend on the civil servant. It depends on the governor, who is a politician, who is a public servant, employed by the people. But then you have another component, submission of annual activity report to the State House of Assembly, for instance. That doesn't depend on the politician. It doesn't depend on public, well, yeah, they are public servants, but it depends on, staff of the audit office, of the Office of the Auditor General at that state. And also, depends on how conversant they are with their own responsibility as captured in the legal framework. So in the audit law, for instance, everybody has a role to play. And whether the governor, the Auditor General, or his people, his staff, or even folks at the parliament, everybody has a role to play. And even, for instance, the effectiveness of the Public Account Committee, like I said, being one of the parameters we measured, does not depend on the governor. It does not depend on the Auditor General of the state. It depends on members of the Public Account Committees who are, at the State Houses of Assembly. So you can see it's a chain. And what you do from the point where the governor needed to kickstart that financial autonomy and the administrative independence fews into how motivated the Office of the Auditor General and the people working there are to continue to discharge their functions. And it then also moves on to what happens at the parliament and whether those at the parliament are encouraged to do their job. So it's a chain.
For me, I'd like to know how much of bureaucracy within the civil service, affects the movement of those documents, and how much of dependence on relatedly approval of the office of the governor, depends on how fast the documents that need to get approval and for the audit reports to get across, affects the outcome of the audit process in its entirety.
Well, to say that, for instance, the Auditor General needs to get his funds as provided for in the audit law, which is that the funds needs to be moved from the Consolidated Revenue Fund straight to the account managed by the Office of the Auditor General, whether on a monthly basis or quarterly basis. It's provided for in the law. That sort of does not require routine approval from the governor. What the governor needed to tell the Commissioner for Budget or whoever is heading that office is to say, yeah, I'm in tune. And I understand, for instance, if you heard or read what the chairman, Nigeria Governors Forum, said when we launched the report, because he delivered the keynote address. That is Right Honorable Aminu Waziri Tambuwal, the Executive Governor of Sokoto State. He alluded to the fact that there are challenges, but that resources are scarce, even at state level, and the governors are constrained as to how to ration these resources. Yes, we acknowledge that, but in rationing the resources, I think one thing that needs to be clear, and everybody needs to come to the table to agree on, is that yes, we need to ration resources, but whatever is agreed to go to the Office of the Auditor General needs to go as first line charge not treat the Auditor General as a petty cashier of the government. Indeed, is an independent. That's an independent institution and only answers to the parliament. So the governor just needed to authorize that and say, yes, I agree, and this is the level of authority, and please, you don't even need to come back to me on a monthly basis. When that is done, the money comes to the Auditor General, and the Auditor General can then discharge his functions, deploys his personnel to MDAs to then, carry out routine audits. When that is done, the report is prepared, and then it takes that report to the State House of Assembly and submits that report. What we realize is that even though many of the laws caters to the fact that once the report is laid before the House of Assembly, the Auditor General has the mandate to then put the report online. Right. But what we realize that even where that is provided for in the law, that is not, carried out, in actual fact.
This is a very interesting conversation, because I remember last year we actually had to go to the streets, go to some of these governments and check just how accountable, how transparent they are.
I remember you had to, cover that report.
Oh yes, I had to go on the streets, and it was a very interesting one, really. And I really hope that Nigerians, after these elections, especially the governorship elections, Nigerians will begin to pay attention to these things. But before we go to Mr. Onyekpere, I want you to give us an overview. 2021, well, 2020, 2021, now the latest report is for 2022. Have states considerably improved? Not forgetting the fact that CFTAS is winding down. There is no incentive, at least financial incentive, for some of these states to be transparent and accountable. Have they performed well, especially in this latest report?
Well, we were here, yes, and you acknowledge that fact. We were here last year when we presented the report. As at last year, when we presented that report, none of the states, was implementing financial autonomy. In fact, we could count maybe one or two that had, initiated actions towards administrative independence. But now, from this assessment, the 2022 assessment, at least 2 states have taken action towards implementing financial autonomy for their state. 2 out of 36. 2 out of 36. And 10 out of 36 have initiated actions towards, administrative independence. But there were other, gaps that we also noticed. For instance, when we were here last year, only 19 states did not publish full audit reports online. 19. And we delineated this last year, that full audit report is different from audited financial statements. But this time around, in the 2022 report, 21 states did not publish audit reports online.
So they've gotten worse.
They've gotten worse in that regard. Also is that for citizens accountability reports, as at last year when we were here, all the 36 state governments published their citizens accountability report. Well, we didn't have issues with that. Unfortunately, from the 2022 assessment, only 12 state governments, only 12, published citizens accountability report online.
That in particular, ticks my fancy, because I'm wondering how many people really are on Google. These are some of the findings. I'm wondering if our people themselves even understand all of this. But this conversation is very interesting. I know that our colleagues, my colleague in Abuja is itching and probably want to take some of these issues on with Mr. Onyekpere. Go ahead, Nota.
Thank you very much. Mr. Onyekpere, thank you for joining us on this conversation. You are a development law and fiscal governance specialist, and you've had these conversations over and over again about transparency in fiscal governance. What do you think of this report that has just been submitted?
Well, it's an interesting report, but I am not surprised at the developments, because the very test of transparency and accountability is about improved management of public resources, and which will show in improvements in the living conditions or in education, health, infrastructure, electricity at the subnational level. We are not witnessing that, rather the situation is deteriorating. I think what happened in respect of audit laws, because we've been following these developments, is that CFTAS and the World Bank Federal Ministry of Finance had some money to give away. And there were benchmarks. If you do A, you get B. If you do B, you get C. Now, the real test of the political will of the subnational governments to implement audit and other fiscal governance reforms is now that the CFTAS, initiative has ended, and there is no more monetary incentive for anybody to do the right thing. That is what will show us how serious subnational governments have been on this issue. And of course, the federal government has not set a good example. we've had 33 states pass their audit laws. The audit regime in Nigeria has been going back and forth since the Obasanjo days. The Obasanjo administration enacted the Fiscal Responsibility Act. They were also responsible for enacting the Public Procurement Act, which were all signed into law. But the Audit Act was passed then, the Audit Reform Bill, but of course it wasn't signed. The Jonathan era, it happened. The first term of Buhari, it happened, it was sent to the president. There was evidence of receipt at the presidential villa, and that was the end of it. It went into cyberspace and was lost. Now we have the federal government, the bill has now been sent back to the president for his assent, okay? The National Assembly has passed it. So we are waiting to see what exactly, because states usually take a cue from the federal government, but this time the states are leading the reforms while the federal government is being dragged, kicking and screaming to join what the states have passed a couple of years ago. I use that word because I've been part of the, these ideas about improving fiscal governance. We were there when the Fiscal Responsibility Act was passed. We made all kinds of contributions. We were also there when the Public Procurement Act was passed. And we are discussing 2007 as against 2023. What is so special while these reforms cannot continue on an ongoing basis? If you recall, during the Obasanjo days, we had what we call the National Economic Empowerment and Development Strategy and the state counterpart, which was SEEDS. And there was what is called SEEDS benchmarking exercises, where the National Planning Commission sent consultants around the Federation to look at the fiscal process, to look at the developmental process, to look at transparency and accountability issues, and states were ranked in accordance with the order of how they performed. And way back, come back 2023, from 2007, how many years is that? And we are still discussing all these preliminary issues because there was no follow-up. If you look at what is happening, like the questions that were thrown to my colleague in the Lagos studio, asking who should we blame, whether it's the elected officials or civil servants, somebody is in charge. Somebody is elected as the chief executive officer of the state. He's the governor, okay? He campaigned around the state. Others campaigned as legislators. You were put in the State House of Assembly, you were made the speaker. Even if there is a conflict in terms of a permanent secretary who is the accounting officer of a ministry, if he gives a direction and his commissioner, who is his immediate supervisor, has a contrary view, the supervisor overrules. The commissioner will have his way at the end of the day. And you are under obligation to obey whatever he said. You can put a protest in writing to the head of service or to say, well, you have given this advice, but it was refused, so that if there's a challenge in the future, you can say, well, this was my advice, but the authorities did not listen to what I said. That is like as if to say you are pleading an alibi if somebody wants to prosecute you. But the buck stops at the table of the elected officials.
Let's see how, do you think things will change anyway? I mean, now that the legislature has financial autonomy signed into law, do you think that will make any difference?
I am not too hopeful, because if you recall, the financial autonomy had been given to the legislature either in the 7th or 6th National Assembly. And when it was given to the states to vote on it, they turned down their financial autonomy.
But now
they've gotten it. Yeah. But the control of the executive, particularly the governor, over the legislature is beyond financial autonomy. Who writes the lists of those who will even stand as candidates for the ruling party in the election? It is more or less at the discretion of the governor. He is the leader of the party at the state level. If you oppose him strongly in your first term, you never get a second term until the political system is reformed. So these things are linked together like a chain. You don't just simply say you have financial autonomy. When somebody determines whether you are coming back for your second term, no matter how excellent your performance has been. So yes, there's a little glimmer of hope, but I also know that there are other considerations beyond legislative autonomy in the Constitution.
We do know that both in this case of transparency in fiscal governance, we know that the Auditor General has a major role to play. You talked about the audit laws that have been passed by some states. Indeed, just a couple of states, how many? 2 or between 2 and 5 have passed out of 36 states. Yeah. And of all the states, only 2 have made progress in implementing the financial autonomy for the Office of the Auditor General. If you put this and the audit laws together, one would wonder, is it a question of who occupies the office, or a question of who implements and enforces those?
Now, if you give the Auditor General financial autonomy, you have empowered that office to do its job the way and manner that Nigerian citizens will expect them to work. And what does that imply? Where whoever is the chief executive and his team know deliberately that they're not applying the financial rules in the way it's stated in the laws and the constitution. If you know you are mismanaging public resources, how do I expect you to empower the person who will come and start using a toothpick to highlight all the infractions you've done? And after that, he goes public, puts it on a website, publishes it in the newspapers. People like, the two of us will now begin to discuss it. The more you empower him, the more you expose yourself. So it's a deliberate situation not to empower that office. Even when the old legal regime was there was an expectation that that office should have been empowered. So if the new law, all that they're doing is to be very slow in implementing it. And I would love to see real empowerment, not in the sense of a tokenism, in terms of, because the laws are saying it is not even the executive that should determine the budget of the Auditor General, because they are the ones looking over the executive in terms of how they spend money. Auditor General is normally supposed to propose a budget to the legislature, and the legislature finally takes the approval. They don't need to consult the Finance Commission or the minister, because if they will, like I said, somebody is supposed to be looking over how I'm spending money. And I know from the bottom of my heart that I'm not doing it well. Should I empower you? The more I empower you, the more I go down. So the best thing is to just give you as little as possible. Make you extremely uncomfortable. Make your work schedule very miserable, like the Siberia of the civil service. That's what most audit offices are. So that at the end of the day, you don't have the tools to do your work. So I will even want to see in practical life how those two states are really empowering in terms of giving them what is due, in terms of giving them adequate resources to do their job. That I doubt, from the political configuration we have now, from our political environment, whether any governor will be willing to do that.
I think one of my colleagues has a question for you. Go on, guys.
Well, thank you, Neil. Mr. Oyekpere, I want to try and provide an alternative, line of argument here. Yes, I mean, for those who are criminally minded, would think empowering the Auditor General would expose, me, because essentially I'm not doing things right. But on the flip side, shouldn't they also see it as empowering this Auditor General actually helps me to do my job better, or at least helps my job go across better, because they help me to identify areas where there are lapses. I can look at them and say, oh, wait a minute, this money was not spent well, then it should be done right. That way, the people get the dividends of democracy, and I'm talking about for the politician now. The people that get the dividends of democracy, and they get re-elected. They are the heroes of the day. Shouldn't that also be another angle to look at it? I know there are different theories about, human behavior, whether we're prone to doing evil naturally or prone to doing good. But shouldn't that also be another way to look at it, maybe?
Yes, what you are proposing makes eminent sense. In a democratic society, people by rational political interests or people by rational politicians. But if you define your agenda as a governor, as whoever, controlling public resources, not within the confines of the security and the welfare of the people, and you also know you can manipulate that system and process that re-elects you for a second term. Of course, we are all living witnesses to the joke of people being told go to court. So when you have that kind of scenario and you think you can game the system, there is no incentive for you to say, let you do the right thing. And moreover, even if the Auditor General finishes a very wonderful work, the final destination for the final decision is that the Public Accounts Committee. And that Public Accounts Committee is of the legislature. And the legislature are more or less likely to be your boys, who you have endorsed in the first time to come, and who you have a threat or sanction that if you don't do my bidding, you may not likely return. So I am saying that this question is simply beyond just the formal laws. It goes to the bigger political system. And also, how much Nigerians are ready to hold those they elected to account, whether in the legislature or in the executive, to say, because of this performance, we wouldn't give you a second term. So if there are consequences for misbehavior, and this is tied to the electoral process, then politicians will be more inclined to do the right thing, to follow the rules, because they know the people are watching. But if this is untied, as we currently have, because there are so much challenges that nobody is sure whether the process is delivering, then you will have to continue to have this kind of scenario. And I want to say that if we have followed through what was done during the 6 benchmarking days in 2007, up till now, we could have had a much more improved fiscal governance system. And like I did even see talking about meeting between the state governors and the, is it an EFCC and the NFIU, you see that a lot of things are very fluid. We have to come to a situation where we have a body of principles on the allocation and management of something like, what do they call it, security votes. Yes. What is allocable? What are the allowed rules? How do you define security within the system? Is it the law and order security? Is it environmental security? Is it cyber security? Or is it human security? So that you don't give somebody a slush fund without rules, which is at his whims and caprices, at his discretion. Then at the end of the day, you want to demand accountability when there was no framework in the first place of how this should be managed. Because if you want to punish me at that stage, when I finish spending and there were no rules, it's just for me to determine. I could plead you have been unfair with me, because there should have been rules which you can now, on the basis of which you can say, Eze, you did not follow the rules, therefore you deserve to be punished or censored.
Well, Mr. Onyekwere may have been spying on your notes when he talked about the deliberate attempt not to empower the Office of the Auditor General. And I was looking, at some of your recommendations. Here you talked about the need for the Executive and House of Assembly and the Office of the Auditor General should work collaboratively. You specifically recommended the appointment procedure, security of tenure, and legal mandate of the Office of the Auditor General. And here again, you talked about how the need for the Office of the Auditor General should be deliberate about enhancing participation in the audit process through annual audit forums. Now, this is ambitious for the Office of the Auditor General, which in normal procedural, procedures of civil service is an appendage of the executives. From your findings, how far are we away from this level where the Office of the Auditor General exercises this much independence?
Yeah, I think we're far away. You see, the first to start with is the legal framework. Once the law is there, we're far away. We're just far away. If the law is not available, then you can say that we're struggling. But once the law has been enacted, the worst you can do is to repeal it. And it will be difficult to do, because it will then send a signal. As to whether they are an appendage of the executive, yes, you could say maybe in practice, but in theory they are not, because the law is there, like I said. As to our recommendations for them to continue to implement audit forums, I think some of them are already doing that. And from the evidence that we availed in our 2021 index, we now begin to assist 5 states to do certain things. For instance, set up their audit offices properly, ensure that they have standard audit manuals, implement audit forums, strengthen the capacity of auditors general in those 5 states to conduct performance audit, strengthen capacity of legislators to ensure timeous review of audit reports. Those are the supports that we are now providing as a result of the evidence that we availed from the 2021 index. So what we're saying is that, yes, there are issues, but are we going to throw our hands up in the air and give up? No. We're going to leverage the opportunities that have been provided by the laws that have been enacted, and trust that, yes, trust and hope that we're going to have, chief executives, that will, behave properly. And we're already getting some. For instance, Osun State is doing fine with regards to financial autonomy, and they don't have a problem. Delta State is doing fine with regards to financial autonomy, even though they have issues, in other parameters.
Delta was ranked 4th.
Yes, Delta was ranked 4th. And, Osun State came first the last time, Osun State and Bauchi State.
But now 6th.
But now 6th, because they couldn't meet some of the parameters that we put together this time around. So those are the issues, but we're going to continue to review this, going forward, and this is an annual assessment, and they know it, and the parameters.
Let me ask you this question. Well, I think I'll take it to Mr. Onyekwere. you know, the natural question that comes to me at this moment is to ask the question whether or not the executives that we employ, Mr. Ekwere, actually know what is expected of them. Because, you know, the question becomes essentially relevant because, I mean, we expect that, I mean, they understand the separation of powers. They understand the office of the Auditor General. Even in private practice, it's a given. There's some things are just supposed to be a given. It's not supposed to be argued what the role of the audit department of any organization is. Do you think significantly, especially in terms of fiscal governance and accountability, that the executives that we employ into the different states and the different levels of authority where we employ them to actually understand what is expected of them?
I am strongly convinced that they do, and if they did not understand at the point of entry of office, they have an armada and plethora of advisors, brilliant professors, all kinds of professionals advising them. So it will have been explained to them. But I think that the central challenge is that their definition of what constitutes their role or the job that they've been elected to do, or their vision of society or the vision of development, that is what inhibits them from giving the Auditor General the required autonomy that is required. And that's why I made that point at the beginning. Normally reforms, fiscal reforms, are usually championed by the federal government. And once the federal government does the reform, then states begin to follow. They take the federal law as a model. But this happened in fiscal responsibility. This happened in public procurement. This even happened with EFCC and ICPC because some states are now enacting laws to set up their own anti-corruption agencies. But in the audit sphere, the states are leading, and the federal government is simply trying to play catch-up. And it was even the federal government that negotiated the SIFTAS loan for lending to states. So why should it be so? So at the state level, they generally look up to the federal government in terms of new reforms. But this is not happening. So what I think is not a question of understanding. It's not a question of appreciating what the law and the facts state. It's a question of sanctions. What are the sanctions if you don't comply? Law is defined as the command of the sovereign, backed by sanctions. If you simply come and tell Eze, please don't drink this water, don't do this, do this, do this. I want to hear if I do it, what will happen? And I don't hear anything. It's like moral adjuration. So I will ignore you and do what I like. And so because until we have that sanctions for chief executives or key government officials, because of failure to comply with all these standards and rules, they will continue doing whatever they like.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to you because one of the questions that also comes to me, I think we're going to take that to Mr. Elemo here with us, is how much of these fiscal governance issues are political as opposed to governance related? We take that and a number of other things up when we return from this break. Please stay with us. Well, thank you for staying with us. Let me bring this conversation back to you here, Mr. Elemo. A question that I wanted to ask you earlier. What is exactly, would you say, are the major issues? Is it more of politics or just a lack of governance gaps? I ask that because there are a number of people who would say everything in the country has been politicized. Well, Kari will definitely come back to the subject of the matter, you know, right after this one. But how much of these issues, what exactly are the issues? Why have we taken one step forward, two steps backward, it will seem to some people looking at the report so far? Is it politics or is it just governance gaps?
Well, I would say it was a mix of both before we had the legal frameworks enacted, especially as regards to supreme audit institutions, whether at the federal or state levels. And like what my colleague in Abuja mentioned, states would ordinarily look forward to the federal government to take a cue, but this time around they are leading. But we also must acknowledge, like for every new initiative, it takes time, right? To incubate and to set those parameters, those machineries in motion. The laws we're talking about now maybe all of these states enacted, amended in 2021.
Even states that have been in existence for decades.
Yes, yes. None of them had audit laws. Many of them had obsolete laws. And some of them that are enacted even years back, like maybe Lagos, like a few other, their laws are inadequate. Completely inadequate.
A lot will be going on in the background there.
Absolutely. So, but now that the laws are there, now there are many actors in this regard. For instance, you have the executive, and within the executive, you also have players. You have the governor, who is the chief executive. Then you have players within the executive, the commissioners. You have permanent secretaries. And then you now come to the office of the Director General itself, and then you go to Parliament. And truly, as politicians, you would want to be, safe in your dealings and ensure that you're not you
don't step on toes or what?
No, well, maybe you're not exposed in that manner that will throw you in bad light before the electorate, because you have other political ambitions. So we've seen in that regard where politics clash with implementation of the laws. But like I said, it's going to be gradual. But for us is that we have decided, even as gradual as it's going to be, we're going to continue to monitor every step of the way to ensure that people don't derail. But we are not in a hurry to get it right. To 100%. Like I said, there are best practices we're seeing from different states. For instance, look at what's happening in Akwa Ibom. Nobody thought Akwa Ibom could even, come first.
By the way, Akwa Ibom topped the ranking, as you just said.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And look at what happened in Yobe State.
Look at the states that are leading and the states that are at the bottom.
Yes.
Yeah.
For instance, Akwa Ibom is doing fine with its public accounts committees, submission of annual activity reports, publishing of full audit reports online. There are some states that have now gone beyond. Even where the laws were not there, they were struggling with putting out the full documents to the public. But now that the laws are there, they are now safe. The Auditor General is safe to publish the audit report online. And like I said, there's a difference between the audit report and audited financial statement. The audit report provides everything to citizens as to more comprehensive, and citizens can easily understand what's happening with public finance and implementation of public policies with the audit report. Again, is that look at what's happening for instance, in a state like Benue. Though even all of these people are our partners and we're working with them, and we must appreciate them, because for instance, from the 2021 index, we had limited states that responded to our research instrument, but for 2022 we had a minimum of 26 states, which meant that they were willing to
out of 36
that responded. So they are willing to work with us and to partner with us in this regard. So,
pardon me, that Benue State you mentioned, just to properly contextualize, Benue State was 36th the last time out, but this time around Benue State is 34th.
Yeah.
So for you, that's some sort of improvement.
Well, not exactly improvement, only that some states got worse. Some states got worse and had to take the place of Benue.
Like Kano.
Like Kano.
And Borno.
Because many of the states, for instance, number one, didn't respond to the questionnaire. But even beyond that is that some of the parameters that we set, they were not operational in their states, and they didn't provide evidence that these things are operational. And for instance, you could have, because there are 8 parameters, you could have one state do well in 2 and do bad in 6, and then because one other state didn't do well in 7 and did well in 1, you could have that option.
Just to be clear, because I'm sure that a number of people are also very, very curious as to how they can also lay their hands on this. We'll come to that in a bit, but I'm pretty sure that Nyota would like to get on in this conversation. But maybe I should ask Mr. Onyekwere. You've talked about this whole laws, parameters, and all of those things. Question that comes naturally to me at this point, Mr. Onyekwere, is, do you see the laws as having enough teeth, as we have it, especially in terms of implementation, to ensure that the proper things are done and there is deterrence for not performing according to what the law expects?
Well, in most of the laws I've seen, there is deterrence for maybe civil servants or maybe junior level public servants who do not conform to the laws. But where the big decisions are taken, there are no sanctions for now, because if the governor decides to give instructions that contradict basic transparency and fiscal governance principles, it still falls back to the State House of Assembly as the only authority that can call him to order or possibly impeach him or discipline him one way or the other. So for others, maybe for permanent secretaries, for ordinary civil servants, there's some level of teeth, but the big political actors, nothing can touch them, which is still not back to the politics of the day. And that's why I was linking the politics of the day to fiscal governance and audit reforms. What some of us are proposing is that going forward, we need even to further refine these laws so that sanctions will become become self-executing and automatic. If you're a chief executive officer of a state as a governor, if you are a commissioner, if you do A or B, this is the sanction that doesn't need anybody to prosecute you. Nobody takes you to court. Nobody arraigns you before the State House of Assembly, but a sanction which ordinary citizens can push for implementation becomes effective, because the political circle is some form of party arrangement. No state legislature, in fact, since we returned to civil rule, with the exception of Alames here in Bayelsa, no other governor has been impeached, and he was even impeached because of pressure from the Obasanjo regime and above. And you can see a situation where speakers are always changed at little or no call. The legislators will impeach them. Most of them are coming from pushes from the executive, who don't like their faces anymore, or who think they will no longer respond to what they want in request for appropriation or passage of bills. So until we get that system of politics worked out properly for sanctions regime to apply at the highest level, there will be no change.
You know, what you're implying is even that issue of immunity for the state governors needs to be looked into again. Are you implying that you have certain areas where the governor should not be immune, especially when it comes to public funds management?
Some level of review, not a total review. You know, the fundamental duties of state given to a state governor or a president or whatever, once you miss those fundamental duties, it shouldn't be anything for the political decision to make, because most of the people who are supposed to call you to order are people within your party,
yes,
who look up to you as the leader, who wouldn't even summon their effrontery to begin to think of calling you to order or removing you from office. So we must have a system where some other mechanisms, particularly citizens-led mechanisms, should be in a position to call such high-level officials of state to order.
That's the elections.
No, that's not election, because that shouldn't be. That shouldn't be elections.
Even the electoral process, various diverse political parties are elected into the legislature.
If for instance, it is established by audit findings that as a governor, as a commissioner, clearly serious amounts of money we are not accounted for under your regime. I mean, under these monies were directly, you are the one spending them, and auditor generals have raised queries that was not properly responded to, and then it's been published in the public domain, then something has to give. Something have to give. You have to be, there must be a mechanism to call you to order beyond asking the fellows who look up to you, the fellows who sigh you, the fellows who will take a bow when you walk in to be the ones to call you to order.
Let's look at those fellows again, the legislature.
Yes.
I asked this question earlier, but you really didn't go into it. We have the audit laws, and we have the Auditor General now being...
You have the Public Accounts Committee of the legislature.
The Public Accounts Committee. Now, the Auditor General has been given independence by law.
Yes.
The legislature has been given independence by law, from the federal all the way down.
Yeah.
Now, if these two bodies that are supposed to be oversighting the activities of the governor as regards public funds management are independent as they're supposed to be, how much of effect do you think it will have in terms of the use of public funds?
If independence is real, you know, there are building parameters of independence. You know, when you say independence, it's not just enough for me to proclaim you are independent.
Yes.
Oh, you get your money independently. But if I have a say, and likely the final say, as to whether you retain your job after 4 years or not, that independence, that independence proclaimed on paper, that independence of how you get your money does not relate to whether you come back as a legislator or not. Does not relate to some other perquisites or things you get which are at my whims and caprices. So I'm saying independence must be properly articulated and define such reforms as autonomy, must come with political reforms such that the votes count, even in primaries, whether it is the delegates primary or the primaries of all the parties, so that you know that if you're opposed to the governor and you are from his party and you are doing well and your people are ready to return you, you are not going to be at his beck and call for him to say, sorry, you are not going back, and that's the end of it. Because the jurisprudence we have now is such that between him and the party chairman, they can decide you are not coming back. If you go to court, you are not getting anything out of the judicial system. It's as bad as that. So real quick, what's the hope? The way forward, I'm saying, is that we have to redefine this independence. A full ramification of redefining of independence of these key bodies that should hold the chief executive to account. Otherwise, the mere fact that you gave them money is not going to change anything. All right, thank you so much, Mr. Ezeonyekwere. He's a development law and fiscal governance specialist. Thank you for joining us on Sunrise Daily this morning. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Nyota. So, you wanted to ask a last question?
Well, yeah, I was going to direct it to Mr. Ezeonyekwere, but let me just bring it to you. I noted in your report that you talked about experiencing a pushback in terms of, initiating these reforms with the states, especially where financial incentives had ceased. But isn't that in itself, a faulty moral logic to, motivate the Office of the Auditors to initiate reforms? And indeed, you can't look at them independently without looking at the state as well.
Well, yes, truly. But before I answer that, let me just quickly touch on some of the things that Mr. Eze said. Is that truly we're beginning to experience some electoral reforms. And we saw what happened with the 2023 elections. What we need to do is for political parties now to take advantage of the electoral reform, get themselves not just to focus on who becomes the president or the senator or House of Representatives, but get into the state houses of assembly and put the feet of chief executive at state level to fire using evidence availed by the Auditor General. I think we can easily get that done. The more broad spectrum we have at the state house of assembly, then we have better debates, robust debates using audit findings, and then you discover that even the chief executive, once you have not one party system at the state level, then it's not easy to overlook what the Auditor General is saying, and then the chief executive then becomes more accountable to the people. But to the question that you raised, is that for the Office of the Auditor General, I think is that they know that they have a responsibility, to the people to ensure that funds are judiciously and efficiently utilized. And it's also even in the self-enlightened interest of chief executive of the state. For instance, we saw a particular state that had about 100 billion naira budget, and almost 30 billion was not accounted for. That's about 30% of the budget was not accounted for. It's not like it's stolen, but it's not been accounted for, which meant that it may not have been used judiciously.
Or could have been stolen.
Or could have been stolen, really. So if you then empower the Office of the Auditor General to help you block, such huge amount of money being taken away from the coffers, perhaps maybe the Auditor General is able to even block additional 20% or 50% of that fund, or even 70-80% of that fund, which meant that you won't lose as much as 30 billion of the 100 billion naira budget. Then you have more funds for development. I think it's also in the enlightened interest. You have to motivate the Auditor General with the percentage of that fund. Absolutely. Is that the Auditor General has your back in ensuring that whatever funds are available to you, whether internally generated or funds that comes from the federal, everything is then put to use properly. Okay.
To wind down, looking at the ranking, Akwa Ibom ranks first, followed by Yobe, then Katsina, and Delta, and then last four, Kano, Borno, Benue, Abia State. I'm just mentioning it just so people who are residents in that state, people who pay taxes in that state, also pay attention. And that's where I want to anchor, because for a lot of people might think this doesn't concern me, but you pay taxes in that state, and you need, whether you like it or not, the government needs to be accountable to you, because it is your money, it is my money. And we complain about governance in this country. So for the citizens, the taxpayers, the people who are actually directly impacted the most, what can they do to ensure that there is better transparency and accountability as well? Is there a role for them in all of this?
No, absolutely. And that's why we need to quickly get over the 2023 elections. Yes, candidates have won elections, some have lost. the cases are in court. We, the people, should leave the cases in court, face them, those that will be inaugurated, those that will be sworn in on May 29 across the country, and face them and hold them accountable using evidence like this. The cases are in court, so let's leave the cases in court. And just because, even if you say someone should not be sworn in, the Constitution is clear. There's no room for interim government. So we have to focus on those that will be sworn in on May 29 and begin to hold their feet to fire.
Essentially, the people have a role to play.
Absolutely.
How do they know what to do when?
Is to look at reports like this.
Okay.
Go on our website. Okay. It's there. Even though it's a bulky report,
it is
in print, but it's that we've delineated it in such a way that once you go online to our website, plsinitiative.org, you can go to our dashboard. Once you get to the SA Index dashboard, go to 2022 SA Index. You can click on your state alone. And once you click on your state on the map, it pops out
all of the information.
And then you can read the report of your state alone.
Essentially,
and I believe use the information to ask questions.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, it's an endless conversation. Democracy is not just a 100-meter dash. It's most certainly a long haul for us. Olusegun Elemo, Executive Director of Paradigm Leadership Support Initiative, PLSI. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
All right, so we're back in a moment to take on another one. Concerns you. Please stay with us.